marsh, underinvestment in bayou communities, and hurricanes, indigenous peoples in Terrebonne and Lafourche have become some of the first climate migrants again. When can our communities begin to thrive instead of always being resilient?
Thank you very much for your testimony. I will now recognize members for 5 minutes of questions, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Denos, how does the delay in issuing the 5-year plan for offshore oil and natural gas leasing impact companies like yours and the affordability and availability of energy for American taxpayers and consumers?
Thank you for the question. The delay, as stated, eventually will create a situation where we don't have leases to work on, we don't have wells to drill and develop, and we won't have production. So that costs jobs. Again, companies like Danos and many other companies out there provide personnel that support those activities. And when we have delays, and I talked about a long conveyor belt. That conveyor belt for some of the really big projects can be 6 or 7 years. But there's projects out there with tiebacks to existing infrastructure that can come on as quickly as 18 months. So we're already in a time now with the delays that we've experienced that that's costing jobs and again, costing production that's being sent overseas and increasing energy prices.
Thank you. Mr. Menorovic, in your written testimony, you discussed the environmental advantages we gain from producing oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, you note that oil produced in the Gulf of Mexico has a carbon intensity 46% lower than Russia, China, Brazil, Iran, Iraq, or Nigeria. Can you share with the subcommittee why oil from the Gulf of Mexico has this environmental advantage? And how is American oil from the Gulf of Mexico cleaner than other sources around the world?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman. That's an important point. There's not anything special about the oil. It's the way we produce it. We produce it into high volume, into centralized platforms where we can monitor the emissions very closely. We're highly regulated. I think this year is the 75th anniversary of setting the first platform in the Gulf of Mexico. We've been regulated by the federal government for 75 years. You know, my company, we get 200 inspections a year where inspectors come out from the BOEM and Bessie and spend about 4 days offshore on each inspection for each of our facilities. We monitor emissions closely, and we don't do any flaring or very little flaring and venting offshore. And then that oil is processed at that central facility, and it's immediately sent down a pipeline. It's not barged at a truck. It's not exposed to atmospheric pressures at any time. It's under pressure the whole time offshore, so we know if there's a leak, and we monitor very quickly. We have vapor recovery units offshore that collect any gas at low pressure and put it back into the system. And there's a lot of different high technology systems that we use on our biggest platforms that monitor emissions. There's no question that this is the best environmentally advantaged barrel of oil in the world.
And then you employ an average of 650 full-time contractors and subs. How does the company navigate workforce management in a market with potential fluctuations in offshore drilling opportunities? And how do uncertainties in the leasing program influence your long-term planning for workforce needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez pointed to the boom and bust cycle of our industry and the layoffs that have occurred, and it's just basically we're price takers and we have to respond to the price. So if price goes down for a period of time, we have excess workers, and it makes it incredibly challenging to man a rig or man a facility or man a crew to do abandonment work if they can't give a full-time, full-year work. And the lack of leases ultimately will result in the lack of stability of us able to drill. And that's what causes problems with the workforce. And eventually people say, well, I could only get 6 months of work, so I'm just not going to work in this industry anymore. And it used to be we could pick up a crew of 80 people to work on a rig pretty easily, but that's not the case anymore. And it's really, you got to continually work that rig, and that's why leases are important.
If the Biden administration does not move forward with offshore oil and gas lease sales in 2024, what kind of impact might that have on the future of your workforce?
You know, lease sales are the future for production in the Gulf of Mexico, and it takes a long time to develop a lease. You know, our reserves are depleting every single day. We're fighting depletion of our reserves. You bring on a well and it's making a certain amount of oil, it begins depleting very quickly. So you have to continually renew your inventory, and the source of that is leases. So it won't have an immediate impact in 23 or 24, but as soon after that, we'll start seeing decreases in workforce.
Oh, thank you very much. My time has expired, and I will now turn it over to Ranking Member Ocasio-Cortez for her questions.
Thank you, Chair Stauber. Mr. Soleil, we often hear private interests cite the job benefits of the oil and gas industry, but from your testimony and from that of many communities, we know